Back during his confirmation hearing last year, then future Attorney General Merrick Garland spoke emotionally about having a sense of debt to the country that adopted his Jewish family when they were pariahs abroad.
I come from a family where my grandparents fled anti-Semitism and persecution. The country took us in and protected us. And I feel an obligation to the country to pay back. And this is the highest, best use of my own set of skills to pay back.
Amazingly, just minutes later, Garland was grilled by Senator Mike Lee of Utah, who is Christian, not Jewish, over whether one of Garland's new deputies was anti-Semitic, which led to another emotional moment.
What about anti-Semitic comments? Would those be relevant to someone wanting to run?
You know my views about anti-Semitism.
Right.
No one needs to question those.
I'm not questioning your views.
I know you're not, but I'm also want you to know I'm a pretty good judge of what an anti-Semite is.
We are in bizarre and scary times for Jewish Americans as anti-Semitic violence and hate reaches new highs nationally. And as they are openly challenged by non-Jews on their loyalties to America and even on whether they're sufficiently Jewish. We got a terrifying reminder of that this week with former President Donald Trump's anti-Semitic rant on social media. He said, quote, "No president has done more for Israel than I have," before saying American Jews weren't appreciative enough. Quote, "U.S. Jews have to get their act together and appreciate what they have in Israel before it's too late." That is dangerous rhetoric. Trump doesn't get to decide who is a bad Jew, but who does? Plenty of liberal Jewish Americans have no problem looking at a Jewish Trump enabler like Stephen Miller and saying he's a public embarrassment to their faith. Jewish Trump supporters in return have attacked liberals as being too anti-Israel and looked the other way as Republicans use anti-Semitic tropes against Jewish Democrats. In fact, says New Statesman journalist Emily Tamkin, this back and forth is part of a debate as old as Judaism, but it takes on new urgency today in an era of resurgent anti-Semitism. That's the thesis of her new book, out Tuesday, Bad Jews, A History of Jewish American Politics and Identities. Tamkin dives headlong into historical debates over whether Jews are white and whether they should try to be, whether their faith and their communities dictate that they should be pro-civil rights or anti-intermarriage, whether they should be Zionists or even anti-Zionists. Along the way, she skewers the political pressures that Jewish Americans have faced and the stereotypes that they still fight back against. In the end, Tamkin, who leans left and secular and openly considers whether she herself is a, quote, bad Jew, makes a renewed plea for liberal pluralism in these thoroughly illiberal times. Quote, "There may not be one recognizable way to live a Jewish life in the United States, but there are many. People are finding and forging them all the time." And the author of Bad Jews, Emily Tamkin, joins me now. She's the senior U.S. editor for the New Statesman magazine and also the author of the 2020 book, The Influence of Soros. Emily, thanks so much for coming back on the show. We're talking about Jewish American identity. I don't want to talk about Donald Trump just yet. Let's talk about you. You interviewed hundreds of people for this book, and you write about how many of them kind of predicated what they said by identifying themselves as quote-unquote bad Jews, and you seem to sympathize with that. Is self-doubt at the core of Jewish identity in America?
I wouldn't say that it's at the core of Jewish identity in America, but I would say that this idea that we're not Jewish enough, that we're doing it wrong, that somehow we're not upholding these traditions in the right way, that has been core to many people's experience as American Jews. I don't think this is necessarily unique to American Jews. I think everybody has an identity, and whatever your identity is, especially if it's a minority in this country, you've grappled with it perhaps at some point. But I do think that this questioning and this debating and this throwing the label across the political aisle at each other and holding it ourselves, that's been a constant in the American Jewish experience.
And Emily, it's only through your new book that I learned the first Jewish member of Congress later founded the anti-immigrant Know Nothing Party, and the first Jewish cabinet member in the US, Judah Benjamin, was in the Confederate cabinet. Clearly, these questions of Jewish identity are not new ones in America.
No, exactly. And that's part of why I wrote the book, is that I think we're in this moment right now where, where you have Trump making the comments that he is, where you have, as I said, where you have people sort of saying, this isn't what it means to live out your Jewish values. But in fact, American Jews have, for the entirety of this country's history, tried to figure out what it means to be Jewish here and have disagreed over it.
So we're in a place now where conservatives, Gentiles like Donald Trump and Mike Lee can suggest in often crass terms that liberal Jewish Americans or Jews who are critical of Israel are the bad Jews. How dangerous is that? How dangerous a moment are we in?
I think it's an extremely dangerous moment. I think, first of all, on the one hand, it's offensive to me that they would say this because they're not Jewish, and who are they to decide that I'm a good Jew or a bad Jew? On the other hand, it's pretty meaningless, as it's not up to them. But I think that what we really need to remember is that American Jews are Americans, and that putting forth some sort of loyalty test to another country or to a political party, that in and of itself, that's I mean, to me, that's anti-Semitic, right? And that it basically requires us to pass some tests before we can be considered full participants in this country. And I think that's really, it's wrong. And to your point, we're in this moment of increased anti-Semitic rhetoric, of perceived increased anti-Semitism. It doesn't feel good to live in that political climate. And
painting leftist Jews as bad Jews, it may be an old conservative trope in the US, but it's also gotten a boost from Jewish far-right politicians in Israel, like Benjamin Netanyahu. How does that work?
And by Jewish conservatives here in the United States. We should say that some came out and said that they quite liked what Trump had to say the other day. I think this alliance works in a few ways. They have similar conceptions of ethno-nationalism. Perhaps they have there's similar Islamophobic components to their politics. And ultimately, and it's not just in the United States, if you look at, for example, Viktor Orban in Hungary, in all of these cases, Israel's support is sort of a kosher stamp, and it allows you to get away, not you, but allows conservative politicians to get away with anti-Semitic rhetoric. And also, it's sort of, I mean, it's interesting to me. One can very easily be fine with Jews in Israel in an ethno-nationalist state and have a problem with him here in your country. And the fact that that's your relationship to Jews doesn't, to my mind, that doesn't make you not an anti-Semite.
Emily, how do American Jews relate to Zionism today? Is it still a core issue? Because regardless of how one feels about the Israeli government or its policies, there is something seductive, obviously, about a place where, as you put it in the book, Jews don't, quote, have to think about how to be Jewish. And yet the polls seem to suggest younger Jewish Americans just aren't that into Israel anymore, not like their parents or grandparents.
100%. And I think when American Jewish groups say, oh, well, most American Jews are Zionists, look, every study shows that most American Jews do still feel a connection to Israel. The Pew 2020 study on American Jews said that about 60% felt very or somewhat emotionally attached to Israel. But that same study said that fewer than half of American Jews had actually been to Israel. And that same study said that younger American Jews in particular felt less attached and were more open to criticism. And you can see why. For the most part, American Jews are liberal. Our political trajectory has been one. The political trajectory in Israel has been another. I think that's true of politics with respect to Jews in both of these places. And it's also true with respect to Israel's policy toward Palestinians. Look, younger American Jews have grown up in a world where they have not really seen any progress be made with respect to Palestinians and allowing Palestinians to live with dignity and safely. And so while there is obviously disagreement on, I don't mean to simplify this or say that all young American Jews feel this way, not at all, but increasingly American Jews are more critical of Israel, even while feeling an attachment to it.
And last question, Emily, what advice do you have for people in the media covering both American Jewish communities and the state of Israel? Because on the one hand, we all want to avoid anti-Semitic tropes where American Jews are accused of dual loyalty or of being collectively responsible for what Israel, a foreign country, does. On the other hand, many leading US Jewish groups themselves heavily focus on defending Israel and reminding non-Jews that most American Jews consider themselves to be Zionists. So how do we best navigate that without causing offense or pushing tropes?
I would say three things. First, as you say, American Jews are not responsible for the actions of the Israeli government. But second of all, I think it's really important that the American media, people often say treat Israel like any other country. That means that Israeli government policy, the Israeli military, that is open to reporting and criticism and analysis, and that reporting on those bases, that is not in and of itself anti-Semitism. And finally, I would just say that I think members of the media today, I mean, this is my own, speaking for myself, there is no comparison between the scale of anti-Semitism on the left and the right in American politics today. Yes, anti-Semitism has no one political home. Yes, it exists across the spectrum. But if you look at the rhetoric that is coming out of the Republican Party today, it is not, there's no comparison. It is a threat not only to American Jews, but to our democracy, because anti-Semitism is a conspiracy. It allows paranoia to fester. It often works in concert with other hatred. So it's not just about Jews. It's also about Muslims and Black Americans and refugees and migrants. And it's important that we don't, as you say, I lean left, so this is my own perception, but most American Jews also say that they feel that anti-Semitism on the right is the bigger threat. And it's important that we not, for the sake of seeming bipartisan or fair, that we not pretend that there's a fake equivalence where there isn't one.